It was the early hours of July 30th. ISRO was gearing up for a launch. That's India's space agency, for those who are unaware, the Indian Space Research Organization, or ISRO. They were launching the PSLV, Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, often known as India's workhorse rocket. The launch was scheduled for 6:30 a.m., but it was delayed by a minute. Do you know why? Because there was a traffic jam in space. Not making this up. And if you're someone who cribs about traffic at every party, here's a new conversation starter for you. A traffic jam in space. How did it happen? How did the cosmos get so crowded? Well, thanks to us, humans. We've been exploring space for quite some time now, more than 70 years. And frankly, we've made quite a mess. We sent hundreds of satellites out there. Some are active, most stopped functioning. But what are we doing about it? Well, absolutely nothing. And this has become a huge issue. Humans have created tons of space debris. But when it comes to cleaning up, we're nowhere to be seen. So what exactly is space junk? How much of it is out there? How does it pose a risk to us? And why should you care? Hello and welcome. I'm Palki Sharma. And on this show, we'll try to read between the lines, the stated and the unstated, the obvious and the hidden, to bring you the full story.
1, 0, liftoff, normal, pivot right.
The space age began in the 1950s. Humans wanted to explore the next realm. We sent hundreds of rockets up there. More importantly, we sent thousands of satellites. These satellites are absolutely crucial for our daily functioning, for internet, for GPS, for military surveillance, for weather mapping, for disaster planning. We need these satellites. But what happens when they stop working? We just leave them there.
Houston, we have a problem.
You see, countries were all racing to set up satellites, but no one thought about cleaning up. Because surely, the great thing about space is that there is so much space. Well, there is. The universe is vast and expansive, but the orbit near the Earth is not. And currently, it is crowded. It looks like a galactic dump yard. There are functioning satellites, space stations, and dead and defunct space junk floating away. How did this come to pass? It's because of a boom in space exploration. 2022 was a momentous year. We broke all records for space launches. More than 2,000 spacecraft went into orbit. And they had to dodge quite a lot. You see, the outer space is brimming with junk. Thousands of dead satellites are moving at high speed. And collisions are a huge threat. When satellites orbit the Earth, they're doing it at a speed of 28,000 kilometers per hour. So even if a loose screw hits a rocket, it means disaster. And how much space junk is out there? Well, as of today, more than 2,000 active satellites are orbiting the Earth, plus 3,000 dead ones. So that's 5,000 satellites, then more than 34,000 pieces of space junk. That's anything bigger than 10 centimeters. As for other smaller pieces, there are millions. It's hard to track them. Put together, that's a lot of space junk. How did we create it? Well, here's how it works. You launch an object from the Earth. It remains in orbit until it re-enters the atmosphere. If released at a lower orbit, say a few thousand kilometers from the Earth, it can return to the atmosphere in a few years. When that happens, the object burns up. In most cases, it doesn't even reach the ground. It is exhausted on its way down, so you don't have to worry about being hit by a piece of rocket. But what about satellites that are left at higher altitudes? Say around 36,000 kilometers. They won't come down. They will continue to circle the Earth for years, maybe thousands of years, long after all of us are dead. And this makes space junk. Some of the debris also comes from collisions or anti-satellite tests. It's rare, but it happens. Some countries like the US, China, and even India use missiles to blow up satellites, and the result is this: thousands of new pieces of dangerous debris floating around in space. How big a risk do they pose? Satellites in orbit must negotiate them. They must move out of the way or be hit by random pieces of space junk. In fact, hundreds of such maneuvers are performed every year. It's called collision avoidance. The International Space Station does it. And countries do it individually. Fortunately for us, collisions have been rare until now. There are very few instances, like in 2021 when a Chinese satellite broke up, or in 2009 when a satellite was destroyed by space junk. But in the years ahead, such cases are expected to rise. By 2030, 90 countries will be operating in space. An estimated 17,000 satellites will be up there. So it's going to get more crowded. And how will that look? A NASA scientist predicted it in 1978. His name was Donald Kessler. He said, if there was too much space junk, it would create a chain reaction. Basically, more and more objects would collide. They would create more debris, and that in turn would collide with more objects. Basically, we'll reach a point where the Earth's orbit would become unusable. Of course, this is the worst case scenario. It's an extreme prediction, but scientists worry that there will be problems. So the question is, what can we do to fix this? How can we avoid a dangerous collision in space? The first solution is monitoring. There are a lot of private companies that monitor space junk. They give real-time data on where it is headed. You track this data and you avoid a collision. It sounds easy, but it's not. You see, space junk is unpredictable. It may be going down one path, but you never know when it changes track. So monitoring will never be 100% accurate, which brings us to the next option, physically cleaning up the junk, a space cleanup mission. The European Space Agency is launching one in 2025. It's almost like a tow truck, picking up cars. But the process is far more tedious. First, the launch must be in the right space. Then it has to align itself with the dead satellite. Basically, that means matching its speed. Then this dead satellite must be deorbited or taken off the Earth's orbit. After that, it must be pushed into the Earth's atmosphere. That's where it will burn up into nothing. Now, this is a very expensive option, and it may not be feasible for all. Which brings us to the third option, sustainable launches. Almost 40% of the space objects belong to the US, 28% belong to Russia, another 19% belong to China. In contrast, India has contributed to just 217 space objects. That's 0.8% of the global space debris. How did we achieve this? By taking a lot of small, sustainable steps. It's part of ISRO's Swachh Antariksh Abhiyan. In other words, a mission to keep the space clean. ISRO often reduces the orbit to 300 kilometers. This way, rockets and satellites will re-enter the Earth's atmosphere and burn out in 30 days. If released at a higher orbit, this could take 18 years. The other way is quick disposal of solid waste. India safely deorbits satellites. Occasionally, space junk does show up, like it did on an Australian beach. But those are very rare instances. So India is doing its bit. What about the rest of the world? There is little or no effort to ensure that space is clean and decluttered. Add private companies to the mix and space junk becomes a much bigger problem. The United Nations has a proposal. Every country should remove their satellite from orbit after 25 years. But it's easier said than done. Countries often fail, and that leaves us with a ton of space debris. What we need right now is a global orbital treaty, something similar to the global plastics treaty that we already have in place. All nations and companies will have to sit around a table and come up with a way to use space sustainably. Because while the universe may be huge, it is not our garbage dump. It's time we cleaned up our act. This too would be a small step for humans, but a giant leap for humanity.